You've heard of swords, axes, and arrows. But what if I told you some medieval weapons were never meant for war? What if they were machines coded in forgotten languages, tuned to frequencies that could shatter more than just bone? Buried by the church, hidden by kings, and erased from history. These weapons hold secrets we were never meant to find. But we found them. And by the end of this video, you'll never see history the same way again. The clang of metal, the scent of iron and blood, the dim haze of twilight over a battlefield strewn with shattered bodies and fractured hopes. It's here, between the flickers of history and the forgotten pages of old chronicles, that the truth lies buried, not just of how wars were waged, but why certain weapons were created, and what ancient knowledge shaped them. The image we often inherit of medieval warfare is romanticized shining armor, noble duels, chivalry, but peel back that myth, and what emerges is something far more brutal, more calculating. Weapons weren't just tools of war. They were instruments of psychological terror, designed not only to kill, but to disfigure, paralyze, and instill dread in those who saw them. And some of these weapons, they shouldn't exist. Take the Zweihander, for instance. A two-handed sword so massive, it defies logic. Measuring up to 6 feet in length, it was wielded not by ordinary soldiers, but by specialist fighters known as Doppelsoldners, mercenaries paid double to fight on the front lines. What's curious, though, is not just its size, but the origin of its forging. Some surviving blades bear patterns so complex they appear almost engineered by modern standards. Metallurgists studying certain preserved samples found irregular carbon layering and edge tempering that shouldn't be possible for the 15th century, and in one case, a blade stored in a Bavarian Voltini etchings beneath the hilt resemble mathematical diagrams, ones that closely mirror modern fractal algorithms. Coincidence, or a clue? Who passed this knowledge down and who erased it? But the mystery deepens when we look beyond the sword, into the hands of those who thrived in chaos. Enter the war weapon of savage complexity. A wooden haft, a chain, and a spiked iron ball. It wasn't just meant to smash through helmets. It was a psychological weapon. In battle, the unpredictable arc of the flail struck fear. You couldn't parry it. You couldn't predict its rhythm. Some early flails, found in Eastern European grave mounds, have hollowed cores in the spiked headspace enough for a liquid. But for what purpose? Monks in 13th century Bohemia recorded tales of burning iron that sizzled even after striking flesh. Alchemists later speculated that certain warriors carried tar mixtures or caustic compounds inside the flail head, incendiary devices meant to ignite on impact. Is this fantasy, or the forgotten echo of battlefield chemistry? The Church, for centuries, suppressed texts on alchemy and what they deemed diabolical metallurgy. Many such documents were quietly seized during the Inquisitions, never to surface again. Yet fragments remain. In one tattered codex, now preserved in a Swiss monastery, there's a chilling sketchier weapon that resembles the flail but is laced with runes along its shaft. It is labeled Malleus Umbri, the Hammer of Shadows. Its head is not iron, but stone, obsidian, volcanic glass, sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. But this reference predates the Spanish colonization of the Americas, where obsidian was widely used. How did such knowledge exist in medieval Europe? Unless it was passed down through whispers, through hidden guilds, through forgotten orders. The man-catcher is another curiosity, rare and seldom discussed. Not truly a battlefield weapon, but a tool of extraction. A polearm with a metal loop, often spiked inward, designed to grab and trap a person, usually and noble without killing them. They were dragged from horses, restrained like wild animals. One such man-catcher was recovered from a collapsed fortress near the Alps in 1893. Inscribed along the shaft, in Latin, Tenebris servitium est, it is in darkness we serve. Beneath it, a symbol no one recognized until 1972, when it matched a diagram found in a book of esoteric Freemasonry. The symbol is circular, fractalized, with a hidden golden ratio spiral embedded in its design. What kind of knowledge were these? Warriors protecting or perhaps enforcing? We often imagine medieval warfare as crude, primitive, but then we encounter the Greek fire siphon, an ancient Byzantine weapon so potent it was said to ignite ships even on water. The technology behind it was deliberately suppressed even by the Byzantines themselves. Why? Was it too dangerous? Or did it rely on substances no longer available, or perhaps forbidden? Modern chemists still can't fully reconstruct Greek fire. It was sticky, it burned underwater, and it adhered to flesh like a living curse. Similar devices were rumored to be used during the Crusades, miniaturized handheld tubes with pressurized valves made of brass, bone, and what one Templar inventory described as fire-breathing serpent mouths. These weren't flames as we know them, but something stranger. If such tech existed, who built it, and why was it buried? Perhaps the strangest relic of all lies in the Château de Montségur, a Cathar stronghold raised by the church in 1244. Hidden within the ruins, a rusted weapon was discovered, an iron staff with symmetrical branching tines, unlike anything in the European record. Local legends claimed the Cathars possessed a weapon that sang before it struck. Scholars speculate it was a tuning weapon, one that emitted a high-pitched frequency. Modern acousticians who examined the weapon say its resonance, when struck, aligns with the solfeggio frequency of 528 Hz. The same tone associated in some traditions with DNA repair and ancient healing. So why was it forged into a weapon? Could it be that war and healing were never opposites but parts of the same forgotten science? Throughout medieval Europe, the line between faith and science was razor thin. The Lucerne hammer, for instance, was designed to puncture plate armor and pull horsemen from saddles. Brutal, efficient. But one preserved hammer, stored in a Czech ossuary, bears carvings that defy classification. The head of the weapon features concentric circles, not ornamental, but mathematically precise. A spiral forms at the joint of the pick and the beak. It's not decoration, it's calculation. Hidden within the grip, mercury residue. Why would a warhammer have liquid mercury in its core? Was it for balance, for poison, or something far more obscure? Vibration, absorption, motion tuning? We don't know. And perhaps we were never meant to. There are whispers of an ancient text, the Book of the Red Wind, referenced only in footnotes by 17th-century antiquarians. It allegedly contained descriptions of weapon-making techniques that echo the breath of the stars. Nonsense, perhaps, but one passage supposedly detailed a weapon called the Eye of the Dying King, described as a blade that never touches, yet kills. No trace of such a weapon survives, and the book itself, if it ever existed, has vanished. Yet, strange deaths are recorded in several siege accounts, enemies found collapsed, no wounds visible, their eyes burned black. Coincidence? Or the residual fingerprints of something far older than medieval Europe, something buried, then repurposed? The further we venture into the labyrinth of medieval warfare, the more it becomes clear. These weren't merely weapons of iron and wood, forged by crude blacksmiths under smoky rooftops. They were artifacts. Some of them, perhaps all are, expressions of knowledge far older than the centuries that claim them. Knowledge drawn from whispers, symbols, alignments, vibrations, or things no longer named. One of the most perplexing examples of this convergence between brutal utility and cryptic engineering is the Scorpion ballista, torsion-powered war engine used by both the Romans and later, oddly, revived by medieval engineers during siege warfare. But in 1994, during excavations at a buried fort in southern France, archaeologists uncovered what they believed to be a late medieval modification of a Scorpion. Unlike any known model, rather than using twisted rope or sinew, its tension system was comprised of overlapping bronze coils, wound with remarkable mathematical precision and inlaid with carvings of celestial constellations. It was not just a machine. It was aligned literally to the stars. Further study revealed that this particular Scorpion could only fire with optimal power if positioned at a specific angle during twilight, when the Earth's magnetic field aligns at a measurable resonance. This wasn't strategy. This was ritual. Warfare, in this context, wasn't merely about domination. It was about ritualized manipulation of energy. Now, ask yourself, who taught them this? There's a forgotten order called the Miliets Lucis, the Soldiers of the Light. Rarely mentioned, their existence survives in fragmented letters between French Templars and the Astronomers of Alan. The letters reference silent weapons and the calling iron tools that, when used, brought down those whose blood sang out of harmony with the earth. Were these metaphors, or literal descriptions of weapons based on sound, vibration, or even bioelectric resonance? It might sound outlandish, but in 2007, a heavily oxidized spearhead was pulled from a peat bog in northern Germany. Inside its shaft was a hollow crystal tube, wrapped in iron wire, and embedded with what researchers first thought were decorative runes. But, on closer inspection, the markings aligned perfectly with binary encoding. When translated using ASCII interpretation, a repeated pattern emerged. Vox Dei, the voice of God. The artifact is now locked away. Its study restricted. Is this not a weapon? Is it not medieval? Or is it something that violates the permitted boundaries of what we're allowed to call medieval? Consider the fire lancer gunpowder weapon developed in China and eventually transported westward via Mongol and Islamic exchange. But there's a gap, a historical silence. We know it existed in China by the 10th century. We know it reached Europe by the 13th. But the versions found in eastern Anatolia, dating to the early 1100s, appear more sophisticated than the models from which they supposedly descended. One discovered in 1992 contains an internal trigger mechanism not seen in European firearms for another 200 years, and inside its barrel, traces of a compound containing saltpeter, lead, and something else, magnetite, crushed so finely it behaved like liquid. Who taught medieval engineers to refine minerals with such accuracy? A document found in a suppressed Jesuit archive, titled De Armis Sideribus, on the arms of the stars, describes a pillar of flame that obeys the whisper of a hand. Most dismissed it as allegory, but one translation notes the weapon was fashioned in the shape of a dragon's mouth, and required the breath of dead stone. To medieval minds, that may have meant coal or gunpowder, but to us, is it a metaphor for combustion, or something more arcane, something that called upon the resonance of mineral intelligence? Could these weapons have once harnessed energy in a way that modern science has forgotten? Let us shift to the claymore, the great sword of the Highland Scots. It was more than a symbol of independence, it was an object of reverence. Some preserved claymores, particularly those attributed to the MacLeod clan, feature hilts carved not with Celtic knots, but intricate spirals and seed patterns identical to ancient petroglyphs found at the Ness of Brodgar in Orkney, a Neolithic site predating the sword by nearly 4,000 years. Why replicate these symbols on weapons of war? What were these warriors trying to invoke or protect? Some archaeologists speculate that these symbols held no martial meaning but spiritual ones. The blades weren't just used in battle, they were used in ritual killings, sacrifices meant not to conquer, but to appease or connect with forces older than the Christian God. In one recorded account from the 14th century, an English cleric described a Scottish warrior who danced with his blade beneath the storm, calling out the names of the sky before slaying a bishop. Madness or memory? What about the morning star, a weapon so simple, yet so terrifying? A spiked iron ball atop a haft, designed to crush skulls and armor alike. But there is an account, buried in the Chronica Moravica, that describes a specific morning star used by a Bohemian war priest, which glowed faintly in the dark, and when swung, left after images in the eyes of onlookers, glow in the dark metal. The idea was dismissed, until a metallurgical analysis of a similar weapon in a Prague museum revealed trace amounts of uranium ore insufficient to cause harm, but enough to suggest intentional luminescence. Who, in the 13th century, understood radioactive minerals, and why embed them in a weapon? Let's speak of the Croatian Teethbreaker, a rare war club with jagged, interlocking iron prongs. Most examples appear purely functional, but in 1938, one was unearthed beneath an abandoned monastery in Slavonia. Unlike others, this one had no blood traces, only human teeth embedded in its prongs. Nearly 47 teeth, all from different individuals. DNA tests conducted in the 2000s showed these belonged to people from widely disparate Norse, Turkic, even North African. What was this weapon? A battlefield tool, or something darker? A ritual object, a relic of human offering? And still deeper into the shadows we go. Hidden in a private collection in Austria is a blade, labeled simply the Whispering One. It is short, blackened with age, and etched with unknown glyphs runes. Not Latin, not any script known in the mainstream academic world. When metal was tested, it was discovered that the alloy contained no known medieval components, but, instead, a meteorite compound found only in a 9th century impact crater in Siberia. The blade rings at an abnormally high frequency when struck, and according to the collector distorts nearby recordings. Microphones cut out, voices echo back on themselves. Some call it myth. Others don't speak of it at all. We have no term for these objects. They aren't just weapons, and they aren't simply tools of violence. They are messages, technologies, ciphers of a lost chapter in human history, one where war was not merely fought with steel, but with intention, with resonance, with silence. What remains in museums is the outer shell, the visible shape, but beneath the rusted metal, beneath the formaldehyde displays, there is a blueprint, not just of war, but of a forgotten intelligence that once whispered, through fire, stone, blood, and sound. Not all of it is gone. Some of it lingers in the texts that were burned, in the vaults that remain sealed, in the relics we were told were misidentified, misused, or mislabeled. But those who built these weapons, they remembered, they knew the truth. And they fought, not just to survive, but to preserve a language of power we no longer speak. And now, that language waits, ready to be read again. The further we go, the more the battlefield transforms. It ceases to be a clash of nations or kings. Instead, it becomes a kind of stage where forces, far older than governments, rehearsed rituals of control, memory, and erasure. The weapons were never just weapons. They were carriers of knowledge, of fear, of sacred geometries, etched in iron. And once you begin to see them that way, something irreversible happens. History begins to rearrange itself. Take the Ulfberth sword blade, centuries ahead of its time, forged between the 9th and 11th centuries. It bore a cryptic inscription, plus VLFBERHT plus. Most assume it's a name, a signature of craftsmanship. But the steel is where the story breaks from the known world. This blade was forged with crucible steel, a material that wouldn't appear in Europe for another 800 years. Its purity is staggering, nearly free of slag, stronger than anything the continent could produce at the time. How some scholars suggested trade with the East, others proposed Viking expeditions brought back steel from Persia. But the volume of Ulfberth blades, found nearly 170, confirmed, makes this unlikely. One theory, quiet and unsettling, suggests these swords were not imported, but reverse-engineered from something older. A relic, a discovery, an artifact found and never disclosed. Some even say an Ulfberth blade was found in a cave, buried, alongside human remains with elongated skulls and jawbones too fragile for war. Most museums refuse to display the original swords. Replicas are shown. The true blades are locked away, quietly catalogued under restricted access. And the patterns? Some Ulfberths contain folded layers that reflect not just strength but code. A repeating visual rhythm that, when scanned digitally, forms a Fibonacci sequence. Coincidence? Pattern recognition? Or the signature of minds thinking in dimensions we've since forgotten? Let us not forget the fire organs of the Hussites, rudimentary multi-barrel cannons used in the 15th century. On the surface, they appear crude, yet early schematics recovered from the Prague National Archives reveal calibration notes not based on distance or weight but on tone. Specific pitch levels at which barrels were tuned to harmonize when fired. Was this just practical standardization, or an attempt to align sound, shock, and rhythm into something deeper? Sonic warfare. Ancient texts in Sanskrit and Babylonian cuneiform speak of battle chariots whose wheels roared in harmony and struck the hearts of men before the flesh. Is this just myth recycling itself? Or is it memory echoing through technology? Consider, now, the Koppisch of the dark Abia blade of Egyptian origin that mysteriously appeared in a Cistercian monastery inventory in Wales in the 12th century. The monks documented it as Gladius ex Tenebrista, sword of shadow. But it matched no European source, and a curved edge bore carvings not in Latin or Coptic, but in a glyph system, most resembling the Prepharaonic Nakadon culture, a civilization whose written language we still cannot decipher. Why did medieval monks guard such a blade? Why did they bury it in a lead-lined coffin beneath a sealed chapel floor? When unearthed in 1981, the room above had no entrance, no staircase, as if the blade had been hidden from time itself. But the strangest weapon may not be a weapon at all. It's referred to only as the null device. In Vatican-adjacent documents from the 1600s, described vaguely as a sealed iron casket, lined in blue and etched with prayers in reverse. Recovered, they say, from a battlefield where no bodies remained, only armor, as if the flesh had simply vanished. One account, from a Swiss mercenary who escaped the scene, said that a sound like wind through bone preceded the disappearance. It's the only known mention. No one knows where the artifact is today, but there are rumors that certain private collectors have sought it. and that entire archives were purged of its trace. And this brings us to a final, sobering question. Were these weapons merely instruments of war? Or were they memories held in steel and fire of something far older than the Middle Ages? Something the medieval mind barely grasped, yet tried to preserve, not out of cruelty, but obligation. In ancient esoteric traditions, it is said that weapons remember, that every strike, every death, every intent echoes forever in the soul of the blade, and when a civilization dies, its weapons do not simply rust. They whisper, they wait. Modern science may scoff, historians may compartmentalize, but in the silent halls of forgotten monasteries, in vaults beneath our museums, and in the dreams of those who still feel history in their bones, the truth persists. There is a war that never ended. A war not just of armies and kings, but of memory versus forgetting, knowledge versus censorship, light versus the darkness that rewrites the past. And in that war, these weapons were not just tools. They were proof. Proof that we once knew more. That we were once more connected to the earth, to sound, to sky, to spirit and, perhaps, to something beyond. The past is not silent. It has simply been buried. And the deeper we dig into old manuscripts, forgotten vaults, and the rusted hands of the dead, the more we begin to see that history is not linear. It folds, it echoes, it hides, and when it does speak, it does. So in Iron *, if you felt the weight of forgotten truth, like the video, and if you're ready to uncover more, subscribe. The past is calling.